Hello, welcome back to the series about hanging pawns, and this time we'll be discussing the disadvantages of hanging pawns, how to play against hanging pawns. So here we have the same structure, and let's talk a little bit about it. So the pawns in the center on d4 and c4 are themselves weak if it's not supported by pieces, which means simplify the position, exchange the pieces. Also, put as much pressure on the pawns as possible, or provoke c5 to get d5 square, or d5 to get the c5 square. Now let's see a great example of these motifs in the game of Fischer against Spassky. c4, e6, knight f3, d5, d4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, and bishop g5. So here we are in the Queen's Gambit declined, castle, e3, h6, bishop h4, and b6. We will not talk very much about the opening. Just here cd5 was played, but the alternative is to play bishop e2, bishop b7, bishop f6, bishop takes f6, c takes d5, and e takes d5. This position was very much examined in the games of Kasparov and Karpov. Let's get back to the main game. cd5, knight d5, bishop e7, queen e7, knight d5, e d5, and rook c1 was played in the game of Fischer and Spassky. Bishop e6, queen a4, and c5. Now Fischer plays queen a3, a very good move, putting the pressure on c5 pawn and pinning it. So rook c8 is very logical continuation. And here Fischer plays bishop b5, underlining the position of the knight on b8. This is a very clever move, at some point preventing knight d7, so a6 was played in the game. Instead of a6, later it was discovered that queen b7 is much stronger, with the idea of c4, a6, and b5. So d takes c5 is kind of forced, b takes c5, rook c5, rook c5, queen c5, and at this point knight a6. So what is the point of knight a6 is that the queen is unpleasantly defending the b5 bishop, which means that bishop has to take the knight on a6, queen a6, and here black queen controls the f1 a6 diagonal very much, which means that white cannot castle. So queen a3 should be played to be able to castle. And after queen c4, queen c3, again offering to exchange, queen a2, castle, and rook b8. Black is doing okay. But a6 was played in the game. D takes c5, b takes c5. And here we have the hanging pawns. If rook takes c5, then just castle, and we see that this rook is pinned, and we have not hanging pawns, but a very good version of isolated pawn, because the d4 square is complete under control, and yet the pieces cannot develop. So d takes c5, b takes c5, and castle. Here in the game was played rook a7 with the idea to kick this bishop from b5, but there are many possibilities for black. For example, let's start with natural move knight c6. After bishop c6, rook c6, there is a very nice knight transfer to b3. Knight d4, rook c7, and knight b3, putting as much pressure to c5 pawn as possible. And in case of c4, after queen e7, rook e7, knight d4, white gets this very good square in the center. It will be very difficult to win this position, but of course white is doing slightly better. Let's see another moves, which is queen b7, and now bishop a4. And if queen b6, after knight e5, with the idea of knight d3 and putting pressure on c5 pawn, a5. In case of rook a7, there is another plan, f4, because knight d3 is met by rook ac7. a5 plans to meet knight d3 with knight a6, but also f4, and in case of dubious f6, f5 is very strong, bishop f7, knight f7, king f7, and rook fd1, and the pawns in the center are really weak. Though if f takes e5 here, then f takes e6, knight a6, well, queen e6, after very good move e4, white gets a big advantage, because now d takes e4, after bishop b3, black loses the queen, and king h8, just queen b3 is possible with a big advantage. So rook a7, f6, f5, f takes c5, f takes e5, and knight a6 is met by e7 with winning position. And let's see another idea for black, which probably is the best idea, queen a7. Bishop a4 and a5. The idea of queen a7 is that it defends the c5 pawn with tempo and does not need any queen b7, queen b6, and after a5, knight e5, f6, knight d3, knight a6, with a very complicated position, but playable for both sides. So castle, rook a7, bishop e2, and knight d7 was played in the game. Instead of knight d7, a5 is very interesting, and rook c3, knight d7, rook c1, rook e8, bishop b5 with a huge advantage was played in the game of Fuhrman against Geller. So knight d7, and here's Fischer starts a great maneuver. Knight d4. Using the fact that the c5 pawn is pinned, and the ideas can be knight b3 or knight e6. And here, Spassky played queen f8 with an obvious idea to attack the knight, and so that the queen is defended on f8, but probably better was to play either king f8 or knight f8. But white still has an advantage, and in case of knight f6, knight b3 and knight e4 is no good, f3. So now c4 is forced not to lose the pawn on c5, queen e7, rook e7, and it is possible to play f takes c4 here, c takes b3, and e takes d5, or to play knight d4, knight c5, and b3. But in the game it was played queen f8. So what is the drawback of queen f8? The right timing to take the bishop on e6. You might think that why Fischer took this bishop on e6, as it is only defending the pawn and not doing anything else. But after concrete line, knight takes e6, f takes e6, Fischer saw that he has a great breakthrough in the center with e4. de4 here is of course very bad. All pawns are very weak after queen e3. And if knight f6, simple ed5, ed5, and bishop f3, white has a very good pressure on d5. And in case of c4, queen h3, attacking the e6 pawn, queen f7, and white completely dominates on white squares. Bishop h5, queen e7, e takes d5, e takes d5, and rook goes to e1 with tempo, queen f6, and bishop g4 or bishop f3 has a very big advantage. So e4, d4 was played in the game. f4. Fischer starts to advance the kingside pawns. Queen e7 was played in the game, but after king h8, with the idea of e5, bishop c4. Here, moves like queen h3 is also possible, and bishop c4 on e5, f takes e5, queen e7, e6, knight e5, and queen g3. And knight c4 is bad due to rook f7. So f4, queen e7 was played, and a very good move, e5, fixing the weakness on e6. White has white-colored bishop, so it can easily attack the e6 pawn. Rook b8. Black tries to put some pressure on the open file and to b2 pawn. Knight b6 here, with the idea to transfer the knight to d5, doesn't work because of queen d3 and knight d5, simple queen e4, followed by bishop d3, and we can see a very dangerous attack on king's side. So rook b8 was played, bishop c4, and king h8. Instead of king h8, if knight b6, then there is a little tactic with queen c5, but even better is to play queen b3, putting the pressure on e6, as knight c4 is not possible because the rook is hanging on b8. So, king h8, queen h3. Now there is a very big problem of the pawn on e6. Knight f8, b3, a5, and it's time to attack. f5. E takes f5 and rook takes f5. And now we see that the pawns are blocked and white has the white squared bishop, which dominates on white squares completely. After knight h7, rook cf1. Here it's important to know that rook f7 doesn't work because of counterattack, knight g5. So rook cf1, queen d8, queen g3, rook e7, and h4. Very good move, completely kills the knight on h7 and restricts the g5 square for it. Rook bb7 and e6. Black is completely busted. e6 pawn is very strong. After rook bc7, queen e5, queen e8 was played in the game. Instead of queen e8, if black tries to push the pawn to d3, then simple rook 5 f3 wins, because after d2 there is rook d3 and black loses the pawn on d2. So queen e8, a4, fixing the pawns on dark squares. Queen d8, rook 1 f2, queen e8, rook f3, queen d8, and bishop d3. Now it's time to have the bishop on this diagonal. Queen e8, queen e4, with several threats. For instance, if rook e6, rook f8 wins, because after knight f8, rook f8, queen f8, there is a lovely mate on h7. So queen e4, knight f6 was played in the game, rook f6, g takes f6, and rook f6, and we see that this king will soon be mated. King g8 and bishop c4, supporting the e6, the very important pawn, and after king h8, queen f4, black cannot avoid the mate. So Spassky resigned here, and this was a great example how to play against the hanging pawns. We will see another games, so see you soon in part 2.